Welcome, everyone. We've got a few people still making their way into the room here, so I'll filibuster here for a moment. I'm seeing some familiar names that were in the morning session, um, but I guess for the sake of posterity, I'll introduce myself again. My name is Charlie Forbes. I'm the program coordinator for Ecology, Spirituality, and Religion here at the California Institute of Integral Studies. Um, This is our afternoon community panel for day 3 of the Religion and Ecology Summit. Um, so Max, well, I'm joined by Max, but Max has the privilege of closing out this summit actually.
What?
So
Wow,
no,
what an
no
honor.
pressure or anything.
Oh my gosh.
Um, but uh, but in any case, we've had a wonderful 3 days here, just enriching conversation and uh, just I'm still gonna have to sit with, I think, for a while, a lot of the information that has come by. But in any case, uh, one of the reasons we're holding these community panels is to sort of act as a foil to the morning panels. In that a lot of times they can be, very intellectual, sometimes theoretical based, not always. But ensuring that we're bringing in a component to the discussion here that attends to lived experiences, um, and and the actualization of real practices. And this is one of the reasons why I'm really excited to have Max join us here today, who's engaged in on boots on the ground work, um, and different forms of activism. So um, I'm really pleased to have Max. Max is an alum of ESR, finished their MA in 2022, I believe it was, um, but is going to be speaking on Outlandish, how LGBTQIA plus teens are claiming their space in the outdoors. Um, a little subtitle here, and an exploration of ritual, nature, and death. At the end of the closing, or at the closing of the morning panel, Dr. Elizabeth Allison had mentioned Max's project Spiral Journeys, which was a reference to some of the scholarship they engaged with during their MA around end of life practices and nature integration, which will be a subject of the talk today. There's just a little bit of a retitling. So just want to acknowledge that for those who may have joined for that reason. Um, so in any case, I'm going to introduce Max, and then Max, the floor is yours. This is designed to kind of be a conversational space for to have it be a bit more interactive. Um, so I'm here to help field questions, to maybe notice if hands go up or things like that. But otherwise, I'm going to pass the baton off to you. Um, Okay, so Max Sovine graduated in May 2022 with an MA in Ecology, Spirituality, and Religion. During their time at CIIS, they focused on forming a program that would take hospice clients out for a few hours of ritualized time in nature. They are passionately determined to help Western culture change its attitudes towards death and nature from aversion to acceptance. They are a trained death doula and former hospice volunteer, EMT, and firefighter. They are currently working full-time as a retreat coordinator at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, as well as part-time admin at Queer Life Space, a small mental health nonprofit that offers affordable services to people in the Bay Area queer community. Under the Queer Life Space umbrella, they have founded their very own Queer Youth Day hike program called Outlandish. An awesome name, by the way. They are also halfway through a 2-year interfaith seminary program at One Spirit Learning Alliance, where they hope to better serve their community through the lenses of multi-religious and multi-spiritual traditions. Max spends their free time playing bass and piano. They love hiking, rocking out at concerts, spending time with their partner, and developing their animist practice. Max, thank you so much for being here today. Really grateful to have you as part of the conversation. Um, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Charlie. Hi, people I already know who are here. Thank you so much for being here. And then hi to people I don't know who are here. I wasn't sure what the turnout was going to be for a midweek afternoon thing, but this is pretty great. So I'm so glad that you all are here. Let me do the old screen share thingamabobber here. Technology, stand by. Okay, here we are. Woo. Okay, so yes, so my name's Max Sovine. My pronouns are they and them. And Charlie already said all the things I was going to say about my intro, so I guess I'll just skip that little bit there. And I am now actually just recently am not doing the administration position at QLS anymore, the Queer Life Space. I'm actually now just purely focusing on Outlandish because I needed a bit more bandwidth to be able to do my outdoor program, which I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about today. So move on here. So I just want everyone to take a moment to lean into what you feel when you look at this fabulous picture here. Maybe take a couple deep breaths, in fact. I'm hoping that y'all feel something positive. And I know not everyone is drawn to wilderness areas. I totally get that. But for me, this picture helps me feel very relaxed. I spent a lot of time in areas like this when I lived in Western Washington State. And there's something about being on that trail and the smell of the air and the feel of the moss and the lack of urban noises such as sirens and traffic and car alarms, except for the occasional plane flyover. So today I wanted to share about some work I've been doing over the past year. And that's my program Outlandish. Thank you. I came up with the name of it myself, and I'm really chuffed. I think it's a great title for a program. I played around with acronyms, and then I settled on Outlandish, and it just felt the most rightest. I founded this program last May in 2023, and it is a free outdoor wellness program for LGBTQIA plus teens in the Bay Area. So 1 to 2 times a month, I take a group out to one of the various park and recreational areas we have in San Francisco and beyond. And we've gone hiking, we've gone fishing and skateboarding and kite flying. And it's been a really incredible experience getting these kids out in nature to learn about their world and themselves. And we've been super lucky to work with park rangers. And extra bonus, many of them are queer. So that, like, 3 weeks ago, we went to the Muir Woods. I took 9 high school students to the Muir Woods National Monument, and we spent about 4 hours with a ranger who's non-binary. And so not only do we get to spend time in nature with these kids, but it's like, here's another adult who's like us, who's queer, and they're successful and thriving, and they have this job, and it's awesome. And it's just like, it's so heartwarming to be able to encounter. There's actually quite an extensive network of queer rangers in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've come to learn as I've been leading this trip. So it's been really fun uncovering this network that exists. And yeah, and so with this ranger for about 4 hours, we took a 3 mile hike around the park, and everything they were teaching the kids was through a queer ecological lens. So whether we were talking about plants or animals or other critters, they were able to share so much fascinating information about the queer ecology that just naturally existed around them. Like I think we sat with this banana slug for like a half hour. I think that might have been the highlight for the kids. They were like super into banana slugs, and so we learned a lot about banana slugs. Like they have enough of their own sex characteristics that they can like procreate with themselves to make more banana slug babies because they so rarely run into each other out in the vast woodland. So that's one fun thing that we learned about banana slugs. And we also do, let's see here, there we go. So that picture on the left there, last September, we went to Candlestick Point State Park, which is this really cool little hidden gem of a state park in Southeast San Francisco. It's right by where Candlestick Park used to be. I think they played sports there. I think baseball. Anyway, and we spent the morning learning how to fish, which is such an excellent experience. As you know, stereotypically, fishing is a very kind of like male het dominated sort of field. And we were just out there. We didn't catch a single thing, but that was fine because we had so much fun and we had gorgeous weather. And our park ranger there on the left in that picture was also queer. And so it was like another example of how amazing it is to have these adults who are thriving out in the world, who are doing their thing and teaching ecology and, you know, non-binary or all the different combinations you can get in the queer community. And there were some locals kind of in the background of that picture who they actually know how to fish, and they caught some things like these local little spotted sharks. It was all catch and release, and they let us look at the sharks. We got to pet the little shark, and then they put it back in the water. And then that afternoon, it was the park's kite flying day, kite making day. So it was this really amazing community event that we got to participate in, and we got to make kites and fly kites, and there was food vendors there, and everything was free. And there was this one spot where you could pedal a bicycle, and it operated a blender, so you can make your own smoothies and all this stuff we got to do with these queer kids who had never been to this park, and none of them have ever fished before or made kites. So it was just bringing these experiences to these kids and creating this environment for them has just been like one of my favorite things in life so far. A huge part of our mission with Outlandish is that these trips are free. So nobody should be excluded from the outdoors because they can't afford it. Many of my Outlandish kids haven't really had much exposure to the incredible parks in the Bay Area as they live in the city, or they can't drive yet, or they don't have anyone to go with them to these areas. And creating a safe place for these teens has been so important. Even in the Bay Area, which compared to many places in this country is relatively safe place to be out, many of these kids I work with still struggle with depression and anxiety, and they still experience homophobia and transphobia at school and out in the world too. So I just wanted to share a few stats from the Trevor Project's annual survey. So for the last 8 years or so, the Trevor Project polls about 28,000 young queer people between the ages of 13 and 24, and they ask them a series of questions about their mental health and their well-being. And so these are just some of the stats I collected that I found really interesting. So 56% of young people who wanted mental health care in this last year were not able to get it. I'm just going to minimize this thing. Here we go. And transgender and non-binary young people who reported that when the people they live with respect their pronouns, they reported lower rates of attempting suicide. Fewer than 40% of queer young people found their homes to be queer affirming. And nearly 1 in 3 queer young people said their mental health was poor most of the time or always due to anti-LGBTQ policies and legislation, of which there is a lot going on right now. And I have a few more facts for you. 41% of queer young people that were surveyed seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. 65% who were on gender-affirming hormones were somewhat or very concerned about losing access to this care. And 24% of queer young people reported that they have been physically threatened or harmed in the past year due to their sexual orientation or gender identity. So that's just kind of a very, very, very tiny part of this survey, and kind of paints a pretty intense picture of the reality for a lot of queer young people in this country these days. So back to Outlandish. This is the sort of program I wish existed when I was a teenager growing up in Wisconsin. I was super lucky, and I was able to go to summer camps and on backcountry expeditions anywhere from 14 to 27 days long. And those experiences absolutely changed my life, and they pretty much have put me on the track of where I am now. I learned how to camp and travel in wilderness areas. I learned how to leave no trace. I learned how to cook over a small camp stove and repair said camp stove when it would break. I learned how to handle encounters with bears and moose. I learned how to read a map and compass, and I engaged with the environment in a way that was profound, sometimes challenging, but always very much worth it. Though I generally got along with my other tripmates when I was in these programs, I frequently felt like I didn't quite fit in. And this wasn't just on these trips. I felt this way in school and my soccer team and in other social situations. I didn't know I was queer when I was a teenager because at that point I hadn't been exposed to terms like gender fluid or non-binary. I think it would have really helped me to understand myself better back then, but that's just kind of the way it all panned out. And back then I felt rather adrift. I was felt somewhere in between a boy and a girl, but there was no adult around to help me understand this. And there was no language for it. So instead, I experienced chronic loneliness, and for the sake of being vulnerable and open with you all, occasional bouts of self-harm. But nowadays, the language of queerdom being so much more expanded, I'm really happy for these teenagers who have a broader vocabulary to explore, and that there are so many programs, at least in the Bay Area, that are safe places for these teens. Another story I really wanted to share with you all was on just like I don't know how determined and how passionate I am about this work. Last October, I was leading an Outlandish trip, and we were in, let's see, I think it was the Foothills Nature Preserve. That's just outside of Palo Alto. And we had a great day. We had a bunch of kids. We had a fantastic hike. We got to hold that snake that's in that picture right there. And it was just like, so, as always, so wonderful to just have this day of like helping these kids, accepting them and giving them the space to be their authentic selves and gender affirming and all of that. And I came off that trip that day and we got back into cell phone service, and I opened my phone and saw that a friend of mine who's a trans man had took his life just that day or the day before. And he dealt with a lot of mental health issues. A lot of it had to do with his queerness and the whole the being what how hard it is to be a trans person these days. And it was just so like the reality of like having this day with these kids, and then this reality of my friend and what happened to him, just like it it just really made the fire inside burn even brighter to like keep doing this work, because it's like I don't want what happened to him to happen to them, and what happened to him in part happened because he didn't have that space as he was growing up to explore his queer side. Um, and so, yeah, it just made me so determined, so much more determined to keep doing this work. And so moving on, I wanted to share just a little shout out to some of these other programs I've come across in my years of doing this sort of work and outdoor education work. Although not specific to the queer community, Wild Grief, which is based in my old stomping grounds of Olympia, Washington, they work with teens and adults who are experiencing grief, and they go on hiking and backpacking trips. So they focus on using immersion in nature to help process grief and find comfort in community. And a huge focus of my time spent at CIIS as a master's student was exploring our conventional Western culture's relationship to death, dying, and grief. And I'm really interested in shifting the paradigm to one of aversion to acceptance. And so this is what I'm going to talk about a little bit later in this presentation. The Venture Out program does overnight backpacking trips with queer youth, adults, and families, and they have a whole bunch of chapters all over the country now. At this point, they're really successful, and I find their program to be really inspirational. And Camp Brave Trails is a residential summer camp for queer youth, and they have a camp in California and Maryland. And then Soul Track is one I found pretty recently, and they connect communities of color to outdoor spaces while also building a coalition of diverse outdoor leaders. And this is just a tiny little taste of all the different inclusive nature-based programs that there are in the country. Like, it's pretty amazing. I've been tracking this pretty much as long as I've been involved in outdoor education and activism. So for, I don't know, almost 20 years now. And I've been witnessing just this like really amazing growth of all these different programs that are emerging. And they all, some of them focus on specific communities and some of them are more broad, but just that there's so many more outdoor inclusive programs for people around this country in particular. So I find that, in spite of everything that's happening that's really intense right now, I also find this work really motivating and inspiring and comforting. So yay them, and I hope there's more, and I think there will be more. So I wanted to talk a bit about some of the ways these kids have been benefiting from time spent in nature. So as demonstrated by forest bathing, known as Shinrin-yoku in Japanese, studies have shown that spending time in natural areas has physiological, emotional, and mental health benefits. And there's a ton of continuing and growing evidence-based studies that have been supporting this. And the kids on Outlandish trips also get to meet other queer kids from the Bay, and they form friendships, they make community, and it helps them understand that they're not alone out there. I also speak from years of personal experience. I spent over 10 years working seasonally as an outdoor educator and backcountry guide. I've primarily worked with youth, and I could see with my own eyes how much good it did for them for spending time out in nature. When I guided a youth trip in Ecuador a few years back, we learned about the rainforest. We stayed with an indigenous community that lived at high altitudes in the mountains, and we immersed ourselves in the like freakingly, amazingly cool ecosystems of the Galapagos Islands. And when I spent 2 summers guiding in Alaska, we took the kids to glaciers and we learned about climate change and we visited dog sled teams so we could snuggle puppies. And we went whale watching and we learned about endangered marine species. And in particular, we learned about a species of shrimp that changes its sex during its life. So even back then in 2007 and 2008, we got this tiny little sprinkling of queer ecology. And I wanted to share that story about that picture there. That's from 2008. And it was my second summer guiding in Alaska, and this picture was taken at midnight on the summer solstice. So we were staying in this little village that's just outside of Denali National Park, and we were like, it's the summer solstice, we should go for a hike. And so we had like 60 kids in our whole group, but these are the ones that wanted to stay up late and go hiking. And so we did this awesome hike to the top of this small mountain with no headlamps, no flashlights needed. And there we got to the summit and like midnight hit, and it's that light out because the midnight sun is such an amazing experience. And we hooted and hollered and howled at the sun. And it was just like, it's those kind of experiences that I've had over the years with young people out in the woods is just like core memories and so heart embiggening and soul enriching. And it's just like, and I could see it in them too. And that makes it all worth it. All the, the stress and the logistical planning, it makes it all worth it just to have these moments with these young folks and plant those seeds for them that hopefully they carry on into their lives after these trips. All right. So I wanted to go into a super brief cultural history on why the Outlandish program is relevant to the reconnection to nature. And this is a subject I have a lot of interest in. In fact, it was kind of like one of the foundational aspects of the ESR program. And I want to talk about the manufactured duality that happened between humankind and nature. And I know this topic has been touched on a lot during this week with the summit, which is fantastic. So this is why I'll just keep it really brief. Um, and I wanted to talk specifically how these attitudes evolved in Western culture, because I'm a nerd and context is everything. And I'd love to talk about evolutions of thought and philosophy in other cultures around the planet, but that's another discussion for another time. So a lot of scholars point to the ancient Greeks as getting, as it were, the ball rolling on setting the foundation for the way that we, as in dominant white conventional overculture, think and interact with nature. Then for the Greeks, certainly influenced by other cultures such as the Egyptians and Babylonians, the gods became the personifications of what could otherwise be impersonal acts of nature, such as storms or floods and rainbows and sunrises and sunsets. And with time and over time, rational thought and inquiry also developed. And this was the process of rendering the workings of nature into universal laws and not necessarily the arbitrary whims of the gods. So then we fast forward to the Renaissance, and science and philosophers decided that they were better than nature, superior to the natural world, and thus entitled to treat it as a mindless resource. If nature is a machine, then we can take it apart, experiment on it, and rebuild it as we see fit. So myths and animistic views of nature and other practices were seen as, quote, primitive superstition and below the hierarchy of rational left brain intellect of science and reason. Not to mention, this way of thinking led to a whole lot of racism, Eurocentrism, and colonial attitudes that were spread across the planet. And this entitlement also came from a religious avenue. And I'm just going to quickly focus on Christian thinking here, though there's also really interesting discourse on this concept from Jewish and Islamic lenses as well. I know has been touched on at some point this week. And the word Genesis, the word from Genesis, dominion, has been a foundational word and reason for a lot of dominating behaviors over nature as well, not to mention domination over earth-based and pagan cultures across the planet. And this domination attitude is currently very much present and alive in far right thinking and religious institutes. There's this thing called the Project 2025 Institute that's pretty scary. And it's all kind of feeds into this domination over nature, domination over other people, attitude that wants to kind of take over everything. And though this attitude isn't universal to all Christianity today, as there are a lot of scholars and clergy out there who are reinterpreting the Bible towards a lens that is more ecologically oriented towards harmonious stewardship of nature instead of domination. Anyway, a lot of these harmful attitudes got brought over to this continent from Europe and contributed to the genocide of people who were originally here. It's in big part why we now have unprecedented climate change, nature and death anxieties, and feelings of isolation, depression, and loneliness. And it's all connected to the idea of rugged individualism as well. But I also want to be clear that I'm not saying all advancements in scientific thinking and exploration were harmful. Obviously, we're all benefiting from many aspects of technological improvements as we sit here in temperature-controlled buildings with the World Wide Web at our fingertips. But with all these comforts and advancements, there is a cost, and that's the destruction of our planet. And I bring this all up today because it is all connected. Mental health is absolutely connected to environmental health. I mean, that's often why we go vacation to beautiful places, right? The more we see our own well-being as separate from the well-being of the planet, the more we're going to continue to perpetuate these harmful behaviors towards ourselves, our environment, and those around us. And we are all part of an integral whole. And ultimately, it's not that these concepts I'm presenting are groundbreaking or even entirely new, as many indigenous cultures across the planet have been saying this for centuries. It's just that our overculture has forgotten this and our hunger to constantly expand and consume. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here. I wanted to talk about really briefly an element that has significantly dropped off in our contemporary dominant culture, and that is rites of passage. And though we do have some rituals in our everyday life, it doesn't nearly quite reach the level that it was essentially before capitalism took over our lives. And though right now Outlandish doesn't specifically focus on rites of passage or ritual, it could be something that we can incorporate into future programming. Fortunately, it seems like rites of passage rituals are re-emerging in our culture. You can now find lots of different organizations and nonprofits that specifically focus on rites of passage in a wilderness container, both for adults and youth. Personally, I believe in the power of cultivating ritual space in nature for anyone, but in particular for people in the queer community as a way to shift the paradigm from wilderness areas being modernly and conventionally dominated by white, masculine, heteronormative energies to all-inclusive energies for people of all backgrounds. So launching off that last bullet point of the last slide, which said common ritualized customs can assist with grieving and processing loss, I want to now talk about spiral journeys. And this is an idea I've been thinking on and working towards for a few years now. I think my experiences with forming and running Outlandish program will help me someday start up this idea. I've been marinating in my brain for a few years. Although this isn't specific to queer ecology, it still touches upon several issues I think are really important. So back in 2014, I read this news story about a former forest surveyor who was dying of MS, and he was taken to this forest park. You can see here the picture in Western Washington State. He was accompanied by his hospice nurse and a local firefighting crew. And for several hours, they pushed the gurney through the park forest and gave the dying man one last chance to look upon the natural world that he loved so dearly. And he was able to share just how meaningful that last trip was for him. And he died just a few weeks after this picture was taken. So this story really resonated with me because I had countless times, as I mentioned earlier, witnessed the transformative power of nature in myself as well as the people I worked with. And though I'd been a seasonal wilderness and front country guide for quite a while, this was the first time I saw anything connecting hospice care and the outdoors. And later on in the fall of 2014, I became a wilderness EMT. I went on to go through fire academy. I was hired as a volunteer firefighter, and then I also worked for a private ambulance company. So in total, I was in emergency medicine for about 5 years. And all those jobs involved witnessing how the Western medical world, in particular North America, approaches death and dying. And a lot of what I saw was really disturbing. I saw people often left alone, sometimes seemingly neglected in nursing home rooms and hallways. I saw terminal sedation. I saw fear, anxiety, and a lot of loneliness. I saw buildings completely devoid of plant life, animal life, and sometimes even natural light. I saw bed sores. I saw depression. I saw terminal agitation. Terminal agitation that's a rough one. That's when, the example I was thinking of was we transported this woman who had brain cancer, and the places in her brain where the cancer was was activating traumatic memories for her. So she was kind of caught in this like twilight area of like reliving these traumatic experiences with a along with the terminal cancer diagnosis. So she was constantly like agitated and aggravated, and it was so much for her family that they often had to have her transported to the hospital so she could be sedated before she was brought back home. And that was a rough one to be with. On the flip side, a certain experience that stuck with me was when we would transport a patient from one facility to another or to a home, and they would leave the hospital on our gurney, and they'd often had been stuck inside for weeks and maybe even months. And each and every single one of those people, as soon as we brought them out of the hospital and that fresh air hit their faces, I could see them like palpably change. They would relax. They'd often let out this enormous sigh, and I could just like feel it in them, just like, oh, and it didn't matter if it was raining or snowing or sunny or windy out, didn't matter. And up until 2 years ago, I had only witnessed that experience in other people. And then I had my own experience with it. A couple years ago, when I had gender affirming top surgery, I developed a post-op infection and I was hospitalized for 4 days. And I had to have a second surgery to clean out my infection. And it was the first time in my life that I had ever been stuck inside without able to open a window or have any fresh air. I was on like the 11th floor of the hospital, couldn't open my window, couldn't leave the hospital floor. And up until that point, I'd always taken access to the outdoors for granted. And wow, after even just 4 days, I was chomping at the bit to get out of that freaking room and get outside and feel actual sunlight and fresh air in my face. And so I was like, okay, this really, again, just really drove home like how much I really want to be doing this work and have helped people have this same experience. Especially, I had only 4 days. I didn't have like months like some of the patients I transported. So, brief fast forward, I volunteered with NODA, which stands for No One Dies Alone. It's a program that involves volunteers sitting in 4-hour shifts, usually overnight, with a dying patient who doesn't have any company for their final hours or days. And these were sacred hours. It was usually just me and the patient. And the depth of night is that magical time between realities. And so every hour I spent with those on the threshold was imbued with this really soft, profound energy. I also became a hospice volunteer. This was a little bit different of an experience, as my clients were frequently lucid enough where we could have a conversation. Although I had this one guy who he had a stroke and he was also Scottish. So I couldn't understand a word he was saying. It was like this extra. So we ended up just watching a lot of Downton Abbey, and that was perfectly fine. And I enjoyed forming a relationship with these people who I was able to commune with. And from my experience, a lot of people, if not most people, do desire some company and presence before they pass on. Not everyone, but most people from my experience. And lastly, I completed training to become a death doula. This work was a bit more involved than hospice volunteering. Our training focused on working with clients to create legacy projects, which could take on a variety of forms, such as a photo album, storytelling or writing, or a slideshow, planning the memorial service, or what the person wanted done with their body after they passed on. And it also involved the more nitty-gritty logistical things, such as filling out an advance directive. So this is my little pitch for advance directive. If any of you haven't filled out an advance directive, I cannot strongly suggest enough to do it. It doesn't matter how healthy you are or what your age is, but for those who don't know, advance directive is a document. It's a legal document you fill out, and it just lets people know what you want done in the case of something happens to you where you're rendered incapacitated or you pass away. And it allows folks to know what you want done with your body, or if you are in a vegetative state or coma, like, do you want interventions such as a feeding tube? Do you want a ventilator? Do you want CPR done on you? How long do you want to be in a coma till they pull the plug? These sort of things, because I have seen from personal experience, when people don't share these ideas or wishes with people who love them, then it can become this really intense experience. If you are unable to share your wishes, then you have family members or friends who are arguing over what they think you would want done with your body, and it's just way easier just to have the paperwork there, and so everyone knows what you want. And you can get advanced directives, like there's all these websites where they can help you fill them out. Hospitals have their own version sometimes. Your health insurance carrier also have it. So that's my little pitch. Please do it if you haven't done it yet, and also let your closest people know where you have it, whether it's digital or you print it out. And you can always update it if your mind changes on certain decisions. So back to my life story here. As my time wore on in emergency medical work, I was getting really burnt out. And I'll be honest, and I'm sure many of you would agree that our healthcare system in this country is pretty broken in some ways. I became really tired of working as an underpaid cog in the machine, working anywhere from 12 to 36 hours straight for minimum wage to transport people and save lives. And it was just not cutting it anymore. And so I needed something more meaningful and more fulfilling and not so soul draining or back breaking. So a new idea was forming. What if I combined my wilderness training, my medical training, and my death care training? So what could I do with that? And so with the help of my partner, and let's move on here. My life experiences thus far and the story of Edward Race, and then also being at CIIS, I came up with spiral journeys. So I chose the imagery of the spiral because it's not only found in art and spirituality of many cultures across the planet, but it's ubiquitous in the natural world. You'll find spirals in strands of DNA, snail shells, fern fronds, hurricanes, global air currents, and even galaxies. And spirals indicate spiritual growth and development, the winding mandalic path from birth to death. And the word spiral shares a root with spiritus, which is Latin for breath and spirit. And so my hope by choosing the imagery of the spiral is to convey a sense of never-ending motion and infinite unfolding to clients. And this project loosely can fall under the umbrella of ecotherapy, and it's something I'm really interested in. With my seminary training that I'm in the midst of right now, which will include spiritual counseling and ritual building, I hope to use my experience to cultivate a rich experience for my clients out and away from the confinement of indoor settings. So here's some of my goals for Spiral Journeys: to provide free excursions to local natural areas for clients and their loved ones. An extremely crucial element of this is that the excursions are free, just like the Outlandish program. I believe in accessibility for people of all socioeconomic classes, whether they're from the city, the country, or anywhere in between. And no one should be turned away from these experiences because of money. This death transcends all political, social, and economic boundaries. So anyone who wants to participate should be able to, regardless of their background. And to facilitate a deeper connection with the site of the excursion through ritual and contemplation. As we examined earlier, our conventional Western society lacks in a lot of rituals and rites of passage. And we know from history and other cultures that these threshold experiences do much more for healing and connection when they are honored. And some examples I have in mind are rituals around land acknowledgement, setting mental, emotional, and spiritual healing intentions, guided meditations or journeys, and observing life and death cycles around us in nature. And third, to facilitate lasting legacy, whether through the simple act of creating positive memories and associations of place, by providing excursions for other clients through donations, planting a tree, and other acts of conservation. So the hope is that the excursions will cultivate a special connection with the land for the client and their loved ones. When the client passes, the loved ones will have this memory of this place and experience, and I hope that will lead to a sense of stewardship and care. So now I wanted to open up this time for some discussion, and I want to hear stories from you all. So here's some things to consider. I'm sorry, what has been your relationship to nature? Has it changed over the course of your life? What sort of rites of passage have you experienced? Where have you felt the most belonging in groups or in places? And what is your relationship to death, loss, grief, and dying? So let me just stop sharing here for now. And I have one more slide. That's like my conclusion slide. So that's enough of me gamming away. I'd love to hear from you all if you have your own stories or experiences or questions to share about any of the content today. And I'm going to have a sip of water. Let's see, there's chat with stuff. What is the, oh, I'm going to read that question in the chat. What is the queer view of original sin? Do you accept it or reject it? How does it show up in actions and awareness? Let's see here. I haven't really specifically focused in on that topic with original sin, but I also don't really believe in the concept of sin as I also don't believe in the concept of hell, as hell was kind of developed much later after Christianity's beginning, and it feels like it's more of a tool. Sin and hell kind of feel like tools of manipulation and control by fear base. So I don't really buy into that, because my experience of the divine from my own life has been nothing but endless compassion and forgiveness. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but yeah, that's my take on it at least. Thanks for your question, Craig. I can go back to that. Let me go back to the questions too, so we can look at the do. Oops. Oh gosh, there it is. We'll just go back to here. If anyone wants to reread some of these questions, and let me minimize so I can see. There we go. Yeah, does anyone have any stories or anecdotes they want to share or questions or anything about this stuff?
Hi,
I can talk,
Max.
but I want to hear more. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, it's so nice to see you and hear what you've been working on, which I knew indirectly, but I got
Yeah,
so much more information today. It's really, really wonderful and inspirational. And I'm so happy about the community that you're building for queer youth, especially in recognition that the lack of community can really have severe mental health impacts. And thanks for sharing those stats so we could really understand, the depth um, of the harm that lack of community can cause, and how amazing to have all these great excursions outdoors. Sounds super, super fun. Um, I just wanted to just now to pick up on your point about the advanced directive, and just like to again tell everyone how super important this is, because we are dealing with this with a family member who didn't have one. And over a period of years, actually, we've been trying to understand what they may have wanted, and they're in a situation where they can't communicate. So we pretty much know that they would not have wanted to be unable to communicate their wishes. But beyond that, if things aren't written down, it is really hard for the loved ones to figure out what to do. So I just wanted to share, like this is a real thing that happens to people, is that my relative had a catastrophic stroke and now can't communicate, and we don't know what their wishes are. So please, thank you for raising that, and please, everyone, make sure you and your loved ones have that.
thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, that's like, oh man, I can't drive that point home enough. One story that popped into my mind too from my years in the ambulance was there was a woman who was the patient was at home on hospice care, and she was like pretty much actively dying, and she had taken a sudden turn for the worse, which is what happens when you're actively dying. And her wife freaked out and called 911 and wanted her to be transported to the hospital, which was against her wife's wishes, but her wife didn't have it written out. And so we got there, and we can't say no as the EMTs. So we took her wife to the hospital, and that's where she died about an hour or two later. And so instead of dying at home with her wife in this comfortable, familiar environment, she died under the fluorescent lights of an ER. And it was just like so heartbreaking. And so that sort of thing does happen a lot. So yeah. Thank you again, Elizabeth, bringing it up again, because it's just like so very important. Um, doesn't matter how healthy you feel like you are, because you never know what's going to happen. Be prepared.
Max, maybe I'll ask a question to you. Unless, oh, Liz, I don't know. I saw you come off camera. Do you want to chime in?
I'm gonna chime in just for a second. Hey,
Please.
I'm Liz, and I work for an organization called Faith in Place, and we mobilize faith communities and spiritual communities for environmental justice. So we often work at the intersection of racial justice and the environment, but um, I've been engaging in this conference all week as like my because I'm trying to like queer my organization because I'm queer, and it's like frustrating to be sometimes the only queer voice, in your environmental space. So anyway, that's my preface to say thank you for the space and for sharing your journey. Um, Something I've been researching a lot is like natural burial. And so with your experience as a death doula and working through grief, um, I would love to hear how you think about natural burial and how you communicate that to different communities, be it youth, like we have a youth program, or spiritual communities, as like afterlife care can be a very religiously charged matter, right? Like there can be theological underpinnings to how people want their care to take place. And so I see natural burial at this intersection of ecology and theology in a lot of ways. And so if you have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I really appreciate your comments and the work that you do as well. So thank you. Heck yeah, being queer it all up, I say. I am a huge fan of natural burials and all that sort of work. I've done a lot of research into it. Actually, when I lived in Washington was when they also legalized recompose. So the first body composting organization, first state to legalize body composting happened when I was in Washington. And I acquaintances with the founder, so I got to talk to her a lot and pick her brain about the work that she did. And for those who don't know, body composting, at least how Recompose, the organization, how they do it is they have this like, there's this container, it's kind of like a big tube, horizontal tube, and they wrap your body in a shroud, like a linen shroud, and then they put your body or whoever's body into this capsule. And they also have a whole bunch of like natural materials like alfalfa and cedar. It's kind of like that sort of stuff that you'd use. And they close up the capsule for, I think it's, I can't remember, it's like 30 to 40 days or something like that. And then the body just decomposes and everything gets turned into dirt. And so you end up with this like pickup truck bed sized pile of amazing nutrient rich dirt. And if you are the recipient of this dirt, you can either take all of it and use it for gardening or whatever, or you can take some of it, or you can donate all of it, and then Recompose will take whatever's not claimed by the people to, and they donate it to nature preserves in the area. So this is just super exciting. And actually, just today, I learned that Arizona has now just legalized body composting. So I think they're the 8th state to be legalizing it, and California is going to legalize it in the next year or two. So body composting and natural burials are just so, I'm so thrilled about them. I have cremation is really, really environmentally toxic. It releases a whole bunch of heavy metals into the air that we all breathe and get rained down on. And it's just, yeah, it's really, really, even though it's cheaper, it's very, very toxic for the environment. And then you have your, on the other side of that, the traditional funerals, which is so it kind of insane to me, personally speaking, because you have like this like cement and steel coffin, and then you have this like cement tomb, and then you have the astroturf, and you don't get your hands dirty. You have a machine that puts the like dirt and it's like if you could separate yourself more from nature and death, that's how you do it, is like be surrounded by things that don't decompose naturally. And it's also super expensive, and it's just yeah, it's just not, you know, if you want to be environmentally conscious, that's not really a great way to do it. And so I find like body composting and green burials to be such a wonderful alternative and not nearly as expensive as like a conventional funeral, at least in this country. Um, and there's a lot of if you know type in green burial and the state that you live in, there's a good chance you'll find there are like specific cemeteries for green burials, and they're kind of scattered around the country, and you can find one. But even with Recompose, I don't know about the other body composting places in the country, but with Recompose in Seattle, you can actually have your body shipped to, you don't have to be in Washington. You can have your body shipped by train to Seattle, and then they can take your body and do the thing there. So that's nice. And you can do a program called Pre-Compose, which is where you pay $100 a month, and that pays your $5,000 fee to do Recompose. So you can have it all set by the time you die, which is really great. So yeah, green alternatives. I've heard a little bit about the mushroom suit thing, which I think is all, if that's like a thing that goes ahead, that would be super cool. And alkaline hydrolysis is also another alternative, is where they use this liquid formula to essentially dissolve or decompose your body, and turns it into like essentially water or some sort of liquid instead of burning it and releasing chemicals. So there's some really great alternatives to that. And kind of tied in with this whole Western, like how we interact with grief and loss and death, is I always think of this example. I don't know if any of you have seen the HBO show 6 Feet Under. It came out in like the early 2000s, one of my favorite shows ever, but it's about a family of undertakers in LA. And the very first episode, like someone in the family passes away and they're at the funeral, and there's this moment where one person in the family is like having this really emotional, visceral reaction of grief, and they're like crying, and then they're kind of ushered out of the room and into another room, because this weird, this interesting attitude of like grief needs to be sequestered, and like, you know, you can't visibly show big emotions because it makes people uncomfortable, and you can't have people be uncomfortable, so you want to put them somewhere else. And this other character had a huge issue with that. He's like, it should be messy, it's like this really intense thing, we should have emotions around it, not be afraid to feel emotions. And I feel like that really translates into how we deal with death and cement coffins and astroturf and all of that stuff. So that's my long-winded answer. And then you had a second question and I forgot it. It was, what was the second bit again, Liz?
I think it was more on the maybe the theological underpinnings of some of your death work. And then I saw another question in the chat about Buddhist influences. So maybe like answering them together, right? So like
Sure.
how your spiritual practices impact your ecological consciousness around death and dying, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi Dakota. Vipassana, Spirit Rock. Yeah. So I don't consider myself a Buddhist, more like Buddhist, just because I've been, you know, I work 40 hours a week immersed up to my butt in Buddhism. So a lot of it has like rubbed off on me, and I've absorbed a lot of really cool lessons from it. And I actually did go on a retreat last October called Maranasati, which is mindfulness of death. And we spent 5 days in a silent retreat where you are contemplating your own embodiment and your own relationship with death and dying. And every day we got to do little breakout groups where we get to share. That was my favorite part. Silent retreats are tough, I tell you. I like being with people where you can talk. So that was my favorite part, was being able to share our own experiences with grief and death and dying. And then at one point in that retreat, we had one of the teachers put on a slideshow of bodies in various states of decomposition, and just like, you know, we were forced to like look at it and sit with it. For me, it wasn't too uncomfortable because just with my work in EMT, I've seen bodies in all various states of damage, and even some decomposing ones. But it's always good to revisit that and sit with that. And yeah, I've been practicing with my own mortality and death and dying for over 20 years now. So I feel really comfortable sitting with it and meditating on it. But I know that retreat was geared towards a lot of people who are kind of new to the practice. So I thought that was just really cool to have that space for people to, in community, to contemplate their own death and grief. And yeah, so not specifically Buddhist, but I glean a lot about Maranasati from that. I'm actually a pagan at heart, so I'm an animist. And I'm a spirit medium too, just to kind of throw that out into the room. So I have my own kind of cosmology around death and dying, but I don't really often bring that into academic atmosphere, except at CIIS, because we can talk about this stuff openly here, which is another reason why I love this place. So whew, that's that. Yeah. Did Charlie have a question?
Sure. Dakota's asking, before I chime in here, do they still offer those retreats?
Yeah, so every year they do a Maranasati or some sort of death retreat. And they're usually in the fall, which is kind of cool because it's always around like that veil thinning time of year, like Samhain and All Souls Day and Halloween and stuff. So yeah, you go on the website, you can find it's usually a 4 or 5 day retreat or so.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I want to pick up on this thread. You know, you mentioned some TV shows that are kind of like part of popular culture. There's a really interesting film called To Dust with Matthew Broderick. Um, it's been quite some time since I've seen it, but essentially, there's an Orthodox Jewish man whose wife passes away, and he becomes sort of really preoccupied with trying to understand what happens to her body after death. This is maybe I'm trying to address the theological thing here, or thread here, just from another vantage point, and through a Jewish lens, which I find very interesting. I mean, in the Jewish tradition, you have to be buried very quickly, and what happens after someone dies and after sitting Shiva is, there's a 11th month, sometimes 12, depending on your tradition and where you live and where you say Kaddish, um, a type of mourner's Kaddish, where essentially the soul, which is animating the body, um, when the individual passes away, um, still kind of lingers around in the flesh for a period of time. And that's a painful process for the soul, in trying to make their way back, into that greater realm, of Hashem. And in so doing, the individuals who are left behind and affected by that loss say Kaddish, which makes its way into the liturgy. Like I'm referencing here Kaddish Tome, which is, mourner's Kaddish. But during the prayer times of, Shachris, Mincha, and Mariv, the three daily prayer times, you hear Kaddish. It's almost used as a bookmark, um, breaking sections, and it's this very sonorous, thing that kind of echoes throughout the shul and the prayer hall. Um, and you're constantly kind of reminded of that, like during your prayers. And, unless you're directly affected, you're not going to say Kaddish. You don't have an obligation to. Um, but I wanted to bring in a film that has a really interesting way of kind of looking at all of these things we're talking about. Um, and how death kind of pervades, living a ritualized life, as far as, when you have a liturgical kind of obligation as an observant Jew, um, which I really love. So you're constantly reminded of that. And yeah, I guess, it brings up like this question around rites of passage for me that you're also maybe asking about. And I'm curious, you know, what you have found in your experience to be, um, what are foundational obligations that you have found in queer settings, and amongst peers, coming together in nature? And it's unfair of me to maybe preface this. It doesn't have to be obligation, which is the magnetism bringing together people and, um, driving a type of ritual or rites of passage. But can you maybe speak to what you find to be, forces that, bring us together, help us move in unity, um, and, like in the interest of like just trying to be better people and bring higher meaning and purpose into our lives?
Wow, that's like, whew, where do I start with that one? So so you're asking about like rites of passage and their role in bringing meaning to our lives is like, and for through the lens of community, something like that, Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's different reasons why people engage with rites of passage. And sometimes that it is rites of passage are ways of making distinctions between, prior versions of ourselves, or sometimes, dividing lines even with groups. Like, we were separate and now we're together. I mean, I'm speaking generally. And it's in the interest of asking this question, like, of course, around ecology and the the health of the planet. And I'm always wondering, like, how do we get people like on the same page? You know? And I think obviously queerness is something bringing people together. And so like I'm stating the obvious, but I'm wondering, um, do you look at just nature time in general, or like how are you framing, a rite of passage, like through a queer lens, when you take young individuals out, into the natural world and structuring something for them?
Mm-hmm. Uh, yeah, for like my thought on it through the queer lens is, I mean, queerness is an identity, and it's an identity that is constantly under threat, and and there's like physically and emotional threat, from being queer in some places. And so it's like the rite of passage is centered, I think, like around finding that inner strength, not only the inner strength, but also the communal strength to be able to be exposed to these potential threats and hostility, and in a way that you can come through with it and have your mental health intact. And nature as especially looking at nature and how queer nature is. And like I said earlier, and like how other people have shared throughout the week, that there's just so much queerness naturally found out in the environment that it's like to see it that way through the queer lens and see how you are a part of that, because we are a part of nature and we are part of this whole, is that this like kind of binding experience that these critters and these plants can be queer in nature and survive and thrive, and I'm a part of that, and so I can too and be a part of that. And so yeah, like creating, like I said, I haven't started doing rites of passage stuff specifically with Outlandish because I'm still like figuring out how many other ideas I can fit into one day, but that is something like I really want to bring more into that work. Does that answer your question? I hope.
It does, absolutely. Thank you. I mean, I didn't mean to be framing it in a way where it had to like fit into that box.
Yeah, no.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Thank you.
And thanks for sharing about the movie and the Jewish practices as well. That's something that's been really fun about seminary, is like really learning. Like I mean, I've been studying religions for a long time, but like taking time with each of the big traditions of the world and exploring like how they approach different parts and rites of passages in their traditions too, as I find it all really interesting. And part of my hope with my future work with Spiral Journeys is when I do encounter people from different faith backgrounds to be able to have the knowledge and be able to work with them within their context, to make the dying journey as, you know, as fulfilling as it can be for them. So, whew. Anyone else have questions or comments or ideas? Or go ahead, Michael. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much, Max, for presenting and for the work that you're doing. And as someone that is trans, I sure wish that you had been in my life when I was growing up in Texas in the 80s, the very early 80s. So I really see the importance of what you're doing. And I'm going to be starting at CIIS in the fall in the counseling psychology program, and with the intention of helping queer youth specifically in rites of passage, because I think that it's so important, because I know in my own experience that when you aren't given those rites of passage, you know, you kind of take those childhood behaviors into adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
So and I kind of see it in, and it's not just people that are queer, but I'm seeing a lot of childlike behaviors. If you look at how people are interacting in a political space, it's like they're like children. Um, and we need adults to be, in order to heal our planet, we need adults to be in charge. And so I'm seeing this, and I'm just wondering if you could speak at all to rites of passage and how um, that could help us in that way of becoming adults. And have you seen anything like that happen?
Yeah, there's this one of my favorite books. Well, this is more specific to grief, but The Wild Edge of Sorrow. I think that's what it's called. I'm totally brain fired, but I have it in my credit, my end slide. And it's a book that focuses on rites of passage and ritual around grief and loss. And I think that's like really huge part of, I think that's like at the heart of our of adults who don't know how to adult well, is they haven't learned how to handle and process grief and loss in a really healthy way, and it kind of like comes out sideways in a lot of different manifestations like control or fear or anger. Actually, I have this theory, and I'm such a nerd. I want to write an academic paper about it someday, even if I'm not in school. I have this working theory that almost every single Marvel superhero movie has a main character or villain or hero who can't process a loss that they've had, whether it's like a death or losing a battle or something. And so their inability to like digest this grief or the loss actually turns into this like one of the main dramas of the whole movie, and it's in pretty much every like superhero movie. And then once you start seeing it in like that, you see it everywhere in pop culture, like movies and books and stories and TV, it's like characters who can't handle loss and they can't handle what it's like to not have things go their way. And so then it becomes this like multiverse drama and chaos and destruction and anger and all of this stuff. So I'd encourage all of you to start like seeing it in our lens around our pop culture, and you're like, you can't unsee it. It's everywhere. And I think that's like really at the heart of our anti-aging industry that's in this culture too, with like plastic surgeries and this and that pill and this and that cream and no wrinkles. And there's a Black Mirror episode where people, instead of dying, would rather upload their subconscious or their consciousness to a computer system because they're so afraid of death. And it's just like that whole concept. And it's just like, it's so in our culture and it's everywhere too. And it's, yeah, people who don't have the rites and the rite of passages and rituals and the healthy way of like going through these really big life transitions, is particularly around loss. If that answers your question and comment. And thank you for sharing, Michael, too.
I see Rachel's raised hand. Sorry.
Thank you so much for this. I was starting to type a question and I thought I'd just ask you. Thank you. This is wonderful work. And I'm just wondering about, you mentioned earlier this movement from aversion to death to acceptance, and thinking about young people and rites of passage. I just felt in myself that working with young people, I'm a teacher, I've just become really death phobic. Like I don't want to talk about it because students are already anxious and the suicidal ideation and all of that. I know that's not the best response. So I'm just wondering, thinking about your death doula training and then your also rites of passage stuff with young people, are you helping them in some way that would help me maybe to think about how to be better and maybe more responsible with young people around acceptance without the affirmation, or I don't know how to put that. I hope that makes sense to you.
Yeah. A couple of things, ideas that popped in mind is meditation practice and just simply breathing and mindfulness, like that Marana Sati is just like meditating on the impermanence of the body and starting small with it, like little few minutes here and there, and just kind of building from there. Journaling, also a really great way. Something I love too is what Pixar has been doing in their movies, like Coco and Soul and Onward are like recent movies that all deal with death and loss and dying. And I think that's like such a really great way that they've just kind of brought that into mainstream culture in a way that's like people can engage with it at all ages. So like watching movies like that or watching other movies that are really like death positive. And also just, I don't know, like reading literature on the death positive movement, because there's so many gorgeous spiritual writings out there on uh on death and dying that I think could really help people. And also the practice of like seeing yourself as a part of the whole, as a part of the universe, can really help with that kind of acceptance of someday leaving your body and whatever it is you believe, but like seeing yourself getting away from that rugged individual and like, I'm alone and I am isolated and I'm going to be alone when I die, and like all of that, and like going more towards the communal integral connection with the everything. I think is a great way to start too, with yourself and with your students. I hope that helps. See that something popped up in chat. Yeah, die wise. That's in my, I'll just move on to the next. Boop. Yeah, there it is. These are some of my favorite sources. There's so many. There's so much material out there on nature, relationship, and also death and dying. But these were some of my favorite books. Thank you, Elizabeth, for introducing some of them to me for school. But yeah, these were just, I just can't recommend these, some of these enough. Die Wise by Stephen Jenkinson is just like changed my life. The way he writes about how when we buy more time, let's say you have a long illness and you buy more time, you're really just buying more suffering a lot because of our willingness to let go. And he just writes about that so beautifully, and how he writes about grief. And it, like, he's just so eloquent, but essentially it's like grief is what cracks open your heart so love can pour forth, because grief is essentially love. That's what it is, right? And anyway, he says it way more eloquently than I can, but I highly recommend these resources on these topics here. And then there's just some of the some more articles there about, these are all links, but I know you can't really click on them because this is a PowerPoint, but I don't know if there's a way to share them, or you can, maybe I can share them in the chat. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not very techie. Maybe Charlie has an idea. Yeah, I love that book. I know, so good, right?
Yeah, if you can stay on the screen here, maybe I'll take a screenshot and then I can just put it in the chat.
Okay, cool.
Would that be okay? Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, here's a question, Max, that maybe links your two initiatives, Outlandish and Spiral Journeys. I'm curious if you can share anything about this. If when you do the excursions with the queer youth and you're building community, and um, they're able to share like maybe some of their difficult experiences, I'm wondering if the question of self-harm or suicidal ideation ever comes up, and like, I guess just first if that's something that they bring into the space, and then secondly, if so, like if all of your thinking on death and dying and end of life and uh sort of developing right relations with life and death is able to support them in some way, if that comes up at all.
Sure. Uh yeah, I always have to be really like discerning because I know my views on death and like afterlife stuff is pretty, it's not conventional at all. Especially as being like a spirit medium. So like in my experience, like death isn't the end, but I know like I have to be really careful about how or who I engage with on this stuff. That specifically hasn't come up on the Outlandish excursions yet, but they have brought up like being bullied and self-harm and just some of the hard shit they're going through right now. And the nice thing about having Outlandish be under the queer life space umbrella is they have a lot of therapists who volunteer and come on the trips, because I'm not a therapist, but it's really great having therapists along because they can really hold that container when these really hard conversations come up, when they do feel comfortable sharing. But it hasn't happened a lot just because like we're only together for like 5 to 6 hours one time a month. So it's like if it were a longer trip, I'm sure it would come up more. But yeah, there was I remember one lunch conversation when we were just, everyone was going around sharing their coming out experience. And then there was a couple of kids who shared about like bullying and things like that. And just being a presence that's listening and accepting of their experiences seems to really help them too. Um, but yeah, the whole like specifically talking about suicide and death stuff hasn't come up so much yet with them, but it could definitely happen at any point. So yeah, I'm ready for it whenever it does.
I mean, I guess I'm glad that it hasn't come up, honestly,
Yeah.
because I feel like a lot of teenagers feel invincible, and I hope
Yeah.
that for them, right? But I was just curious if that intersected. Yeah.
No, yeah, that's a good question. Thankfully not yet. Yeah, I know, right? 'Cause it's like, whew,
Yeah.
yeah. But I've had a few kids, outlandish kids who had to go to inpatient facilities because they tried to commit suicide. That's not the first. I've had a few times now that's happened, and it just makes me so damn sad. Because I'll like reach out to their parents and be like, "Hey, I have another trip coming up," and then their parents let me know, "Oh, so and so tried to take their life last night, and now they're in a facility," and it's
Oh,
like,
gosh.
yeah, right. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really, really, because I like, there was one, like, I spent the whole day with this kid and they had so much fun and they seemed so happy. And then the next day, their dad texted me to let him know what happened. And it was just like, they had a great time on this trip and they just did this thing or tried to do this thing. It's like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Oofta.
Oh. And how do you handle that yourself? I mean, that's super intense to like know that people you care about are going through such hardship.
Yeah, it's, oof, how do I handle that? I take a lot of walks. I spend a lot of time in nature. I talk to my partner about it. Uh, yeah, and it's just like it just feels like it's just getting worse, it's just everything that's going on with climate change intensifying and the currents in this country with far right rise of far right fascism that's really blatant at this point. It's just like so much more anxiety. Actually, that's a question I've asked some of the Buddhist teachers at Spirit Rock just last week. I'm like, what? Because they've been teaching for a long time. I'm like, what have you noticed? between like pre-COVID and now, as far as like trends in participants on retreats, and they're like a lot more anxiety, a lot more anxiety.
Mm.
And I asked our like on-call psychiatrist the same thing in her own personal practice, like, what have you noticed in the last few years? She's like, a lot more anxiety. So anxiety is just like this thing that's happening more and more these days. Do you know in general the statistics of suicide among the different groups? Let's see here. I have a slide, Craig. I'll just go back. Let's see if I can go back. I don't know about, I mostly have the statistics on youth. So let's go back. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. See if I can minimize that. So let's see. I thought I had a stat on there sometimes. Oh, or maybe I have it in here. Let me just scroll back a bit and get you that information. There was a stat I had on suicide for queer youth from the 2023 survey. 41% of 28,000 youth who were queer youth who were surveyed last year seriously considered attempting suicide in the past years. 41%. That's a pretty big number. Yeah, it's too high. It's too high. No matter what degree it is, it's too high. But 41% in particular is pretty scary for that. I'll stop sharing though. Don't need that anymore. I think Pope Francis and to be a benefit for your psychology and integral ecology learned in San Francisco. Let's see. I have to check on what he has recently said about trans people, because I know there's been a bit, the Catholic way and how they've been engaging with the queer community has been a bit rough at best. So I don't know exactly what I know he's said a few things in the last couple of years, but I don't know what the most recent view on the trans community and Pope Francis. But that being said, study like it's really nice to have a pope who actually believes in climate change and like it recognizes that environmental destruction is happening and that conservation needs to happen, which feels like kind of a new thing compared to the last pope. And so, but there's still a lot of damage that's been done by the Catholic Church over the years towards the queer community. So it's gonna take a lot of healing. And this is actually a conversation that came up in seminary class just this last weekend, because we had a presentation by someone who's a Catholic priest, who's an openly gay man. He's one of the few openly gay men in the Catholic broad community, and he's just his experiences with it. And there's still kind of a long way to go as far as kind of making peace with all of it. But there's slow mini steps. But integrating, Catholic religious belief on conservation and stewardship, and with the queer front, I think there can be a unity in that. And I think it is happening. It just doesn't make the headlines as much, unfortunately. Oh, thanks, Dakota, for sharing those resources. Those are great books too. Both of those authors or practitioners are wonderful. Yeah. Anyone else have any other comments or questions or anything they want to share? Been a good chunk of time. But if not, that's fine too. Oh,
I have one. I have one.
Yeah.
So bigger picture. So based on the applied work you're doing, as well as the conversations we've had this week in the Religion and Ecology Summit, I'm curious about your perspectives on how queer theory and queer practices can and should inform the field of religion and ecology.
Ooh, it should be lumped in there with all the other big major categories of integral. Actually, when I took integral ecologies at CIIS, there wasn't a queer ecology unit. We studied all these other different integral ones, and I wrote about that in my final paper. I'm like, why isn't this not included? Because this is like really huge. Because it's just, yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, there's queerness in nature. It's just so everywhere. So why are we not talking about this more? And I saw on social media once someone posted this really cool, I'll just paraphrase it, but this idea that like the liminal space where there's sunrises and there's sunsets, and there's that space between the forest and the field where they meld over like this, and that how that applies to queerness, that there's night and day, there's sunrises and sunsets, there's dawn and there's dusk, just like with humans, where you have all these different liminal spaces, and queer theory just like slides right into that so naturally, where we, you know, people who, especially people who are like non-binary or trans, really like live in that liminal threshold area. And in how in so many, and like if quite a few indigenous cultures were like the people who were, you know, two-spirit or lived in the kind of in between genders, lived in between the spirit world and material world, and how sacred that is. And that should absolutely be conversation in our ecology, you know, our different explorations of manifestations of ecology. So more of that, please.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it's really great.
Yeah, and Max, I also just want to recognize, you know, I want to say this to you directly, but you know, also for the sake of the group, in the sense of just expressing appreciation for the work that you do. It's not easy, even in even just to be an outdoor nature guide, you know, like holding space for youth, uh, let alone queer youth, or let alone people that are about to cross into another realm, you know, working with these liminal spaces. It's not easy as a human being to be there and be present. Um, and so I just, you know, want to thank you for your work and in some way try to express, you know, my gratitude for the spaces that you're holding and constructing for people that are grappling with all sorts of challenges, and we need more people like you in this world. So thank you for being um, you know, a leader, for being a charger kind of on the front lines in certain respects, and for helping pave a way for people that you know, I hope can follow. You're setting an example. So I just, so thank you, and just want to make sure I got the chance to say that to you. I'm not sure if I've ever said it in quite that way, but
Oh,
yeah.
thanks, Charlie. It's yay, make my heart all go burp. Really appreciate that. Yeah, this work is just like I now that I've been so like going like with spirit rock work and outlandish and my idea around spiral journeys, it's like there's no way I can just do some random job that pays the bills. Like it just like it's inconceivable to me. I have to do work that always has some sort of paradigm shift to it. Otherwise I'll just be bored and unhappy. And I'm really grateful that I was able to launch outlandish and make my own thing. Like I've, you know, I spent my 20s working for other people and their organizations and their outdoor programs, and now like being able to do my own thing and directly benefiting from how much the kids love it and benefit from it is just like, oh, it keeps me going with all the craziness that's going on in the world. And and I'm so excited to just gain my more experiences with dying people and chronically ill people and people who need to be outside more, who are often overlooked because, you know, we focus on certain demographics and not others, you know, and getting people who are another idea I had was working with people who've had near death experiences, because like that's often a really profoundly transformative experience that like they, you know, whatever it is, and they come back and they recover from the injury or whatever it was that was caused the near death experience, and there's not a culture that can accept that story and hold that story of whatever happened to them, whatever it was. And I really want to also cultivate a space for people to integrate back into mundane reality after having this like brush with death and mortality. Um, so anyway, that's a rambling thing, but yes, thank you. And I'm really honored to have been able to present here. And I'm a big fan of CIIS and just want to stay in touch with the community here. There's my person. Hi, person. Waving at me. Anyway, yeah, thank you everyone. And thanks. This was a wonderful day and I'm so happy to have been able to talk with you. And thank you for sharing and ideas and questions and such.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Max.
much.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, Max. Yeah, really fantastic presentation and wonderful, wonderful work that you're doing. ESR is so proud to claim you as one of our alums. So grateful for you.
Hopefully in the next couple of years, I'll be back for doing the
Yay.
PhD thing. Yay.
Yay.